Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show, Week 6 recap, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, for anyone out there that isn't a Cowboys fan. So joining me, as always, on this lovely Sunday night edition of the show, the one, the only, Dwain, The Rock McFarland. Dwain, happy Sunday night. How's the mood over there in Dallas?
It's fine, man. I expected this to happen. I was hanging out with a bunch of friends and my brother yesterday. We were all watching the Texas OU game. You know how it is. Like if you're hanging out at something like that, people are like, what's your pick for the weekend? I said, the Cowboys are going to get absolutely smashed. I told folks I thought the line should at least be 10. So feel free to tease it up. It was sitting at 3. Had a bunch of texts, saying, hey, that was painful, but we also won. So there was a silver lining. So yeah, that's what I was hoping to achieve. And, look, we'd rather the Cowboys win, but whenever you're walking into something like that, man, the Lions are such a good team. Yeah, rough one.
What a win for the Detroit Lions. Kind of wild seeing them empty out the trick play bag there, up 4 touchdowns in the fourth. I think they took that, controversial defeat last year a bit personally, but you know what? Certainly guessing Ben Johnson has plenty more to go with that. So we'll get to that game, guys, after we get through about 10 more first, because as always, got to kick things off with the first game, and it was an early one, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. The Bears took down the Jaguars in London, 35-16. Actually entered as 1.5-point dogs, and nearly cleared the over on their own at 44.5. So really, Dwain, another impressive performance from Caleb Williams, stacking him up against some bad defenses, sure, but man, seeing some of the throws he's putting on tape now, very easy to get excited about the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, and the big thing is just watching him. And since this was an island game this morning, I got to watch every single snap that he took. But I'd gone back and watched the film from last week, and he's just a lot more calm in the pocket, and he's not bailing out so fast. He's still holding the ball, and he's still waiting for the big play. It's not like everything is just, I'm trying to get it out super quick, but he's not bailing from the pocket when he doesn't have to. So it really does look like he's getting more and more comfortable every single week. You mentioned it last week. Ian threw for 304 yards and 2 touchdowns. This weekend, only 226, but very efficient, threw 4 passing touchdowns in this one. So also been known to use those legs, been using those a little bit as well. So yeah, man, looking at Caleb, this is a lot more, this is closer to what we really hoped for whenever we saw what he was doing in the preseason. Was a really rough start. Spreading it around too, man. We've got a lot of different wide receivers involved. So when I look at what we're seeing with Caleb Williams, to your point, don't want to get overly crazy with it, given who this has come against. His 3 biggest games have come against the Colts, the Carolina Panthers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. But you can only beat who they put across from you, Ian. And I take it as a positive that he has done that. And again, the big thing is just watching him. He looks a lot more comfortable right now in the pocket.
Not making, nearly as many negative plays. Did take 3 sacks today, but only lost 5 total yards on those. Meanwhile, Dwain picked up 56 yards on the ground. Some of that Konami code rushing upside that we were hoping for when we drafted quite a bit of them, just a few short months ago. Also with the Bears offense, mentioned those 4 passing touchdowns, 2 each to Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet. Starting to see Cole Kmet, Dwain, just go on week by week. That week 1 game where we did see Gerald Everett, really splitting the usage, seems like forever ago at this point.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if you're sitting on, if you're sitting on Cole Kmet, you're feeling pretty good about it. I mean, we have to go back to your point to that the week 1 experiment. I can't even remember exactly what the number was that week that Gerald Everett was, but he outsnapped Cole Kmet. And it's something that we saw coming in the preseason and all that preseason utilization, but it does seem like it is pretty much shaken out evenly now. This is a guy averaging over 14 fantasy points per game, Ian, over that stretch. He's right around that 80% route participation. If we exclude week 2, he's now right at 80%. But even if you leave week 2 in, route participation sitting right at 74%. And he just looks like one of these guys that, honestly, I kind of thought he would get lost in the shuffle with DJ Moore there, with Rome Odunze there, with Keenan Allen there. And that really hasn't been the case. He's just really been holding his own. So I just think it's hard at this point to call him anything less than, a mid-range tight end 1 with how much everyone is hurting. But I mean, the target share, 18%, that's pretty good, man, in an offense with this many weapons. 18% is good, period. But to be at an 18% in an offense with DJ Moore plus Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze, I think that's really strong. I think you're going to have some weeks where you're going to get the up and downs with Cole Kmet. Obviously not going to catch 2 touchdowns and have some of these long catches every single week, but he really is part of the weekly game plan.
pretty wide open touchdowns, but hey, they were good scheme plays. Hat tip to Shane Waldron, someone we certainly have thrown under the bus several times. So got to give him credit when it was due. You mentioned the tie for the team high with 5 targets. Again, Keenan did have the same. His 2 touchdowns, again, true dimes from Caleb Williams. Really great to see. Again, those tight window red zone throws. And also 5 targets for DJ Moore, Dwain, who did dud in the box score, just 4 catches for 20 scoreless yards. That said, on the 1 Caleb interception, a better pass might have been a 41-yard touchdown. And we also did see DJ get all the way down the 1-yard line, but stopped sadly just short before scoring. That touchdown actually ended up going to DeAndre Swift, who put together yet another big performance, 91 yards on the ground and another 28 through the air. Dwayne, the Bears are going to have a week 7 bye, so we don't have to worry about ranking them right away. But week 8 against the Commanders, Swift going to be inside your top 12?
Yeah, man. I just think when you look at it at this point, like, can we not call Swift a top 12 rest of the way? I mean, our big concerns were around what? The offense mostly. We knew the utilization was there, but his production has really come on. Offense is making the strides we wanted to. Caleb Williams making the strides we wanted to. I think everything you said earlier with a little bit of buyer beware because of the defenses that this has come against. But at the same time, man, I just don't know how to keep him out of at least the low end running back 1 conversation. I talked about it last week in the utilization report, and I actually ran his comps. Even then, before this performance, Ian, this was a guy that already almost half of his comps came in as low end running back 1s. And there was like 8% of them were high end running back 1s. And then the rest were high end running back 2s. Well, now that we have this performance in the bag, it's going to go even higher. The utilization score is going to move up again. So it's one of those rare situations, Ian, where we're getting production, which we need. We have to get the production. You're also getting the usage or utilization, and we're in an offense that's improving. Like, it's the perfect recipe for DeAndre Swift. So I think you got to look at him as a low-end running back 2 the rest of the way. I think worst case, you have a high-end running back 2.
Pretty perfect example, Dwayne, of following the utilization, through some of that porous production that we saw during the first 2 weeks. Funny how that thing ends up catching up after too long. So bear down, everyone. 4-2 going to the bye. Great day to be a Chicago Bears fan. And yeah, haven't been able to say that a ton over the years. So happy for all of you out there in the Midwest. Over with the Jaguars, Dwayne, they are stuck in London. They're not allowed to come back to America until they win a game. No, in all seriousness, they are just playing another game in London next week, 9:30 a.m. kickoff against Drake May and the Patriots. But at least for today, man, pretty rough performance. Now, we've seen Trevor Lawrence have some horrendous games this year. Don't get it twisted. Dwayne, you've had some great rants about him that were not incorrect by any stretch. But this was one of those games where it's a bit tougher to be too hard on him because, my God, man, I legit counted 4 drop touchdowns, 2 by Gabe Davis, 1 by Brian Thomas, and another by Christian Kirk. There's been 3 times in the last 3 weeks where Jaguars have literally taken headshots, just boom in the end zone, and I'm not even sure if they're going in the stat book as drops because they're hitting them in the head instead of their hands. So again, T-Law throughout the season hasn't done himself a ton of favors, but man, neither have these wide receivers. So rough day for everyone involved, except a certain returning tight end, Dwayne. Evan Ingram, 10 catches for 102 scoreless yards. Might as well be 1,000 yards with the way the position's been treating us this year.
Tight end position got right today, but Evan Ingram was definitely one of the leaders in that movement. So it was a nice week to get him back from the hamstring. We saw him in week 1, didn't do a lot. Week 2, right before the game, he tweaked it. So a lot of you didn't have any warning. So that really hurt. And then having him out of your lineup also hurt. But he really did reward you if you hung on and you got him back into the lineup this weekend. Ian, 74% route participation. That's good. Not elite, but 29% target share. He led the team. 20% air yard share, and he scored 18.2 fantasy points. So this is a mid-range tight end 1 the rest of the way, basically where we were thinking of him before the season. Looks completely healthy, and he's gobbling up, man, all of those looks underneath the defense. All of those looks. So, I mean, we've got Christian Kirk working the slot, more in the vertical slot role, right? We've got BTJ working more outside, and we all know Gabe Davis is just out there running gassers. That leaves a lot of room here, for Evan Ingram. And honestly, I think it's going to help Trevor Lawrence. As much as I've railed on Trevor Lawrence, having someone else that can help out underneath, to really challenge the defenses, this is a plus for Lawrence moving forward.
In between those gassers and drop touchdowns, do got to know Gabe Davis did happen to haul in 2 touchdowns, which is one of the most Gabe Davis things that you probably could have done on the, after, in the morning slate. But yeah, man, again, overall disappointing performance from the passing game. We'll know Brian Thomas probably should have had a 45-yard touchdown earlier in the game. That time, though, it was certainly on Trevor Lawrence.
That one,
threw him bad. Yeah, that was on him. So only other major note, Dwayne, would be this backfield. So Jaguars running back Travis Etienne did suffer a hamstring injury early, which caused you listening to this right now to have more total yards than him. So didn't see much ETN. And honestly, Dwayne, didn't see as much Tank Bigsby as we could have expected. I do wonder if him fumbling that kick return maybe didn't help his cause.
Possibly. I think the game script is really what got him. It was the trailing game script was probably the most likely thing. So I did go back and look at all of the drives without Travis Etienne on the field. 27% snap share to Tank Bigsby, 37% of the rushes. So he had more of the rushing share than D'Ernest Johnson, but it was really Johnson getting those passing down reps. So I think that was the big challenge for him today. Only his route participation was only 16% for Bigsby. So when they went to that 2-minute offense, it was D'Ernest Johnson. And to be honest, that's a role that we've seen the Jaguars use. We saw the Jaguars use Johnson in that, roll down the stretch last year. Yeah. He started taking snaps away from Travis Etienne. So I do think this is a guy that the coaching staff is pretty comfortable with in that role. So knowing that, I do think if we have a week without Travis Etienne, we're going to have Bigsby as the leading rusher on the team. Assuming they're not into a game script where they're trailing by multiple touchdowns, I think you'll probably see Bigsby get 55, 60% of the rushing attempts. But there's always going to be a danger that if the script goes sideways, Ian, we know that right now, at least, it could change next week, but right now they don't see him as their 2-minute back. And so that makes him one of these, game script dependent running backs. A little bit of a rougher game for Bigsby, but man, before that game, I went back this weekend and I watched all the film. I know I was sending you screenshots, Ian, and I was asking Ian for his opinion. I said, hey, from the former linebacker, like, is he making the right cut here? But man, he looked fantastic, dude. Just speed, strength, all those things, acceleration. So I don't doubt the talent at all at this point. And the fumble, to your point, it could have been a factor. Hey, Ian, I did start him in Scott Fishbowl, and so those kick return yards did help me today. He scored 25 fantasy points in that silly format. Look, and I love Scott Fishbowl. The scoring rules blow my mind with the kick return stuff. I also started the Tampa Bay Buccaneers second running back, who we'll talk about more later. He gave me 50 fantasy points.
That'll work. You will, take that any chance you can get at the office. So final point would just be on Bigsby. If we do see ETN missing next week, again, Patriots, certainly not a defense we saw have all that much success against the Texans today. So look, we've seen guys like Trey Sermon, Tyron Tracy, Antonio Gibson kind of get around that lower end RB2 range, Dwayne. Seldom have we been ranking them as these top 15, must start guys. So when I'm looking at our ranks, going in today, we had Chuba Hubbard, Bucky Irving, DeAndre Swift. Those guys were around that kind of borderline RB1. Do you see Bigsby falling more so with them or kind of back with this Trace?
No. More towards the mid to lower end range of running back twos. We'll get more into it next week. But yeah, I think there's just too much risk with the way they might use D'Ernest Johnson, to push him that high. We know the talent's there. And if the game script did work out right, let's say the Jaguars led, and that would be a game script where they could lead against the Patriots, Ian, I would say that Bigsby's going to carry running back one upside next week. If they come out and they beat the Patriots by 17 points, I would expect, Tank Bigsby to be a big part of it, probably be close to 100 yards rushing, probably punches in a rushing score, but it's just that risk of what happens on the passing downs.
Yeah. Next up, we had the Eagles take down the Browns 20-16. Cleveland did cover as 8.5-point dogs, ruining a couple of your boys' parlays, but we will watch the film and get better. The under did cash here at 42. So Nick Sirianni, Dwayne, just such an easy guy to root for, yelling at his own fans about whatever after the game. So
God, he's so screwed.
Win is a win is a win. Good job by the Eagles, faithful. So Jalen Hurts, 264 yards through the air, 2 scores, also chipped in 33 yards on the ground. Nice get-right performance after a couple of, down ones before their bye. Big reason was, of course, the return of his top 2 wide receivers. AJB continuing to do some absolute king shit. 6 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Devonta Smith also chipped in 64 yards and a touchdown. I will say, hey, all the points count the same in fantasy land, but AJB certainly a bit, tougher, kind of had to body some dudes and went on his own. Devonta's 45-yard touchdown was a crosser that really just got lost in translation. He ended up walking into the end zone there. So pretty much business as usual from this passing game, Dwayne, other than the injury gods striking down Dallas Goedert with an early hamstring injury. Actually led to Grant Calcaterra going for 67 yards on 4 catches. So did we see a full-time role from Goddard's backup?
No, we did not. But, well, actually, it was pretty close. Actually, yeah, it was. Hang on, let me get rid of.
We got there.
It was. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. Yeah, it was 89% route participation for him today. So that was really good. You mentioned it. Scored 10.7 fantasy points. Like I'm not gonna like get overly crazy about it. I don't know what they'll do next week when they actually have another tight end active. That's the thing when you lose a tight end in the game or any position, like how many other players are active. But yeah, maybe he's a punt play for DFS next week. I will just say real quick, like AJ Brown, looking at him in his 2 healthy games this year, 36% target share, 23.3 fantasy points per game. In those 2 games, Devonta Smith has still been pretty good, though. To your point today, basically he got the Tucker Kraft play from last year where you kind of get last week, you get lost. You got a perfect blocker lining it up. You do your part. Like, you read the angles and everything and you do your part, but still 20 right now, 15.4 fantasy points per game in the 2 games with AJ Brown. So you still got a solid wide receiver 2, and he is getting that slot role with AJB out there 57% of the time. We do have Devonta Smith working from the slot. And he's got a 23% target share. So you're going to feel pretty comfortable having him. Obviously, the AJB is the clear alpha in this offense.
They get the Giants next week, which will certainly be a fun secondary to feast on, and a revenge game for Saquon Barkley. He will need it after going for 54 scoreless yards on 20 touches today. Most notable play, Dwain, was he got a dump off in the flat, and like the still shot that you'll probably see on Twitter at some point was just brutal. Even watching live, man, I had no idea how he could not get the 1 yard he needed. Kind of went out of bounds. Just one bad play, but yeah, it was almost as weird how strikingly bad it was. So not freaking out about Saquon. Still an every down workhorse. Again, would fully expect him to get right in that week 7 revenge game against his former employer. Over with the Browns, Dwain, we can sit here and list the 20 stats that tell you just how bad Deshaun Watson's Browns offense is. I would just like to note, who can we start, if anyone? Nick Chubb's going to be back next week, but probably needs something there. Just know all around here, Jerome Ford hurt his hamstring. That's not helping, man.
Look, I don't know. Like it's hard to move Amari Cooper below a wide receiver 3. He had a 26% target share again today. So eventually this is it's going to be enough. Like he's going to be a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 2 on a certain week, but you just have to know that, yeah, it could be a wide receiver 5 performance. He had 8.2 fantasy points today. So basically you're hoping for a game where he pops off, or if you could get 2 in a row of him popping off, and then maybe you could move him, or you're hoping for Jameis Winston. But David Njoku, I will say, had a 30% target share today. So this was his first true healthy game back. He came back last week, but he had to leave the game. Only scored 8.1 fantasy points on that, though. So it does suck. You're like, oh, man, 30% target share, 8 points. The other guy had 26% target share, 8 points, because Deshaun Watson is absolutely terrible.
Maybe the second half gets him going. I think he didn't throw an incompletion until his last pass attempt of the game in the second half. But when you're taking 5 sacks,
he started hot in the second half.
But he has that happen. He doesn't throw an incompletion until the last one, which forced a field goal. And you look up and they still only scored 6 points in the final 30 minutes.
I will say one of them was on Amari. He doinked it right off his face mask, and there was plenty of room to run for Amari on that play. And they needed that. That was a 3rd down early in the game. Amari probably picks up another 20 yards on that play with his yak ability, but it's rough all the way around.
And that's the only thing I would stress here. Yes, I do believe Jameis Winston is a better option under center, but I still think this is a bottom 5 NFL offense with or without Jameis. It's going to be a hell of a lot more fun with Jameis. I think we're going
to I agree, but you would score fantasy points. You're going to score fantasy points with Amari Cooper if you get Jameis. I agree it's still a bad offense. But we just know Jameis is going to go YOLO, and he's just gonna push the ball down the field more, all the things that help us get the fantasy points we want.
Yeah, so Amari, work on those hands, O-line block a little bit better, and maybe we'll see Jameis as a starting QB before too long. The Browns now, just the 4th team since 2000 to have under 300 total yards in each of their first 6 weeks of the season. They joined the 2004 Dolphins and 2018 Cardinals and Bills. Not great, Dwain. Heard a stat that going into halftime, they were 0 for their last 26 on 3rd downs. Just sounds fake. Maybe it is fake. That's freaking crazy, though. All right, let's move it right along. The Buccaneers beat down the Saints 51-27. We had some high scores today. Obviously, the over cashed at a lowly 42.5, and the Bucs covered at 3.5. So Baker Mayfield, 4 more touchdowns, 325 yards through the air. Yeah, he did throw 3 picks, but man, Dwain, we're even getting Baker on the ground. I absolutely love this dude's irrational confidence as a scrambler. Got him banged up a little bit, had to miss a play or 2 with a shoulder injury, but at this point, why are we still ranking guys I'm not saying we did, but I feel like we still think of people like Jared Goff and, those sorts of guys as almost the same tier as Baker. And maybe I'm getting sucked into the 6-week sample size, but Baker is actually giving us that sort of extra boost in the rushing floor that, we talk about with Brock Purdy. Rest of season, Dwain, Cousins, Goff, Baker. Why would we not take Baker at this point?
I would definitely look at the schedule, which I haven't, but yeah, I mean, I think it's all right there. I do agree on the rushing stuff. I mean, this week he had 3 scrambles for 29, the week before 5 for 43. I mean, in the first 2 weeks of the season, 3 scrambles in each of those games for 21 and 24 yards. So yeah, I mean, he's going to have a record year as far as his rushing production goes. Even if it like stopped right now, he's probably really close to like what his record is. So I hear you. I hear you. Baker's just so like wheels off. Like I don't know why. Maybe I just need to get my head around. I've had him as a borderline QB1 for the last several weeks, and it's just based on kind of matchup and how explosive we think the game's going to be. And obviously scoring fantasy points. You know, I haven't found anything better at predicting future fantasy points for quarterbacks than just fantasy points. That's why there's not a utilization score for him. So that's why Baker ranks higher for me. So I don't really think too much about it, but I do agree. Yeah, I mean, it's a guy that is adding an element that those others don't, and he is as productive as they are through the air.
I mean, I looked it up, I think, before last week. And at this point, I want to say dating back to week 1 of last year, it's Baker, Dak, and Jordan Love as the only guys with, 7 or 8 games with at least 3 passing touchdowns. So really, the comeback story with Baker continues on, and the dude's playing great football. Certainly getting some help from his top 2 wide receivers. Chris Godwin went off today, 11 catches, 125 yards, 2 touchdowns. Would say he got a nice assist from some poor tackling by the Saints on that 55-yard catch and run, but certainly still went out there and made the most out of his opportunities, and someone that we can continue to rely on big time. Similar sentiment is true for Mike Evans, though. Dwain, just 34 scoreless yards in this one. Didn't get full eyes on it. Didn't make my quad box, so I couldn't tell if it was a Marshawn Lattimore induced one. He did get banged up there for a little bit.
He was hurt, and he was rotating in and out once he got hurt, and he looked more like a decoy, a lot of the time.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it was mostly to do with the injury. So we'll just have to monitor that and see where we're at with Mike Evans heading into next week. Assuming he's healthy, this is probably just a data point that we brush off.
They get the Ravens next Monday night. So one extra day for him to hopefully get right. And then a pretty great matchup, Dwain, for everyone involved.
So tough decisions having to wait on Mike Evans is what we're
about to say.
That's what we're leaning towards. But yeah, I mean, golly, yeah, if he gets to play against the Ravens, we're going to love it.
Get healthy, Mike, please. Your fantasy managers are begging you. But Dwain, still got to talk about the main story here, which is this backfield led by Sean Tucker. Went off 136 yards and a touchdown. Also had 56 receiving yards in his score. Now, yes, Bucky Irvin was the lead back, 81 yards and a touchdown on the ground, plus 24 receiving. But what did we see from this split, Dwain? Because judging by the box score, did not exactly look like the workhorse Bucky Irvin show that we were probably expecting.
Oh man, and Sean Tucker just looked really good playing. But if we take away the one garbage time drive at the very end of the game when it was way out of hand, and the Buccaneers were mostly just giving Sean Tucker all those carries, Bucky Irving had 70% of the snaps. That's elite. He had 48% of the attempts, so he was sharing, but only 28% went to Sean Tucker. That's Baker Mayfield factoring in, right? 63% route participation to Bucky Irving, 30% to Sean Tucker. Obviously, Sean Tucker did lead 21.8 fantasy points in the box score versus 18.5 for Bucky Irving. But yeah, Bucky Irving was pretty clearly the one. If I had this isolated down just to the running backs, like it would look like a 1 and a 2, not a 1A and a 1B. Now, having said all that, as good as Sean Tucker played, like, do they not give him a little more work? Man, dude, Rachaad White's in serious trouble. Yeah. Like both of these guys look way better than Rachaad White. Like if I'm the Buccaneers, I don't even put Rachaad White back on the field. Like, I don't see the point. These two guys can do
though. I hear you, but
they probably, but this could turn into a 3-way committee. Like Sean Tucker, man, like he had already been earning the trust of the coaches on the kick return stuff the 2 previous weeks when he had come through on really big plays. So we'll see. Like I wouldn't want anything to do with Rachaad White the rest of the fantasy season. Somebody could try to give him to me and I wouldn't even take him. Like I don't even know if I could find anybody to drop. Like in your 32 team league, Ian, I don't know if I could find somebody to drop for Rachaad White right now.
I mean, if you happen to be playing with Sean Alexander, I think you could probably get a nice
oh my God. How did Sean Alexander pull that name out of his hat?
I think he got Rachaad White and Bucky Irving confused. That's the only thing.
Okay.
You know,
It's like, what's happening?
that was pretty funny. For those that didn't see that Sean Alexander clip, cited Rashad White as the running back that he's just been loving to watch this year. So again, pretty funny. Sean, again, amazing running back. Shout out Bama, shout out Seahawks and everything he did. But pretty funny moment there for sure. Over on the Saints side of the ball, though, Dwayne, we had the debut of Spencer Rattler. Went down swinging as we kind of expected, 22 for 40, but threw for 243 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, and even chipped in 27 yards on the ground. So we did see, again, him willing to throw the ball deep, and accordingly, Rashid Shaheed had 149 unrealized air yards. That was tops in week 1. Unfortunately, didn't exactly see the most accurate balls because, Shaheed only caught 1 of his 7 targets, and Chris Olave sadly just 5 scoreless yards before he exited early with a concussion and a lost fumble for his troubles. So what did you overall think of the Spencer Rattler experience, Dwayne? And after seeing him for 60 minutes, how do you think he impacts his wide receivers moving forward?
Look, I thought for being, a late round dart throw, essentially. And now, look, the guy has got pedigree and some talent that, I don't know all the reasons, but certain NFL, I shouldn't say certain, most NFL teams just didn't want him, right? They really let him fall down the draft board. But it is a guy that we thought at one point in college was going to be someone that was really good. He was a big recruit. I thought he did fine, Ian. I mean, it was a 55% completion rate. I get it. Like, that's not ideal, but they got so far behind. The defense knew that they were going to be throwing the ball. I mean, he had 243 yards. He threw 2 picks, but he threw a touchdown. Honestly, like, Derek Carr hasn't been that good since the first 2 weeks. So I don't know, like, how huge of an issue, like, really is Spencer Rattler. And might Spencer Rattler look a lot better in a game script where it's not, potentially a blowout and they're actually able to do more of the things that they want to do. I mean, losing Chris Olave early, I mean, that sucked.
Doesn't help.
That was right away. So I think that's really tough to grade. I mean, Bub Means was out here. Bub Means was like one of the main guys.
Respect, Bub Means.
Respect, Bub Means. All right. So anyway, we'd rather have Derek Carr out there, but honestly, I don't know that it's even that big of a downgrade right now for the Saints offense.
Saints are down their 3rd string center today. Again, that offensive line certainly contributed to that fall from grace after the first 2 weeks of the year. But I'm with you, man. Whether it's Jawan Johnson or Foster Moreau, who wound up leading the team in receiving, you did see some of those big-time throws where the arm talent was flashing from Rattler. And accordingly, maybe he can keep things going, at least to a decent extent, while Carr is out. We are expecting to see Carr miss 3 to 4 games with that oblique injury per Jay Glazer. So going to be a quick turnaround to Thursday night facing the Broncos. That said, Pat Surtain, did go ahead and suffer a concussion, so you would think he's unlikely to suit up in that one. Would help everyone involved with the Saints. So if we do see Dwayne Olave out, because hey, speaking of concussions and short turnarounds, that's going to be rough. Rashid Shaheed, someone that all of a sudden is breaking into the top 24. Dude still look good out there. Returned to punt for the touchdown for the homies.
Yeah, I mean, and we've had him in the top 24 though. So I mean,
Not
he's been right
week.
there.
He was like
not this week, because we had to see what we had with Spencer Rattler. Right. So I mean, now that we've seen that basically he can throw for 200 yards, which is all we were getting from Derek Carr. Yeah, I don't see a situation where I'm going to punish Rashid Shaheed too much. I mean, he had an 18% target share today. Bub Means was at 21%. Alvin Kamara was at 21%. So, I mean, he was right there in the mix, led the team, obviously, in air yards, as he always does, 49% today. So, I think, maybe we call him a boom bust wide receiver 3 with Spencer Rattler. But, I think you're going to be fine getting him into most lineups.
Alvin Kamara did score a short rushing touchdown and managed to catch 5 passes for 24 yards during the course of the game. So, maybe we're not ranking them top 3 for a week or two because the scoring upside doesn't look all that great here, but certainly still someone getting enough touches to still be a rock-solid RB1 in Fantasyland. Next up, we had the Packers take down the Cardinals 34-13. Green Bay covering easily as 5.5-point favorites. They get a push on the 47-point game total. So another just really great performance from Jordan Love, Dwayne. I mean, he's now thrown 12 touchdowns in basically 16 quarters this season. And every time you see him go out there, you're hearing another stat where he's the first one to do it since one of Brett Favre's MVP seasons from the 90s. So not saying Love is necessarily going to win the MVP this year, but man, they keep this going. I can certainly see his name in that, sort of argument for the 4-2 Packers right now. So great stuff from Love, and accordingly, great stuff from his wide receivers. Christian Watson caught a touchdown. Romeo Doubs back from suspension caught 2. We even got Jaden Reed a touchdown as well. None for Dontavian Wicks, who sadly was forced to exit early with a shoulder injury after playing just 10 snaps. So after we did see that happen, Dwayne, how were the rest of the snaps divided? Because we also did have Jaden Reed dealing with that ankle issue.
It was just a big increase for Christian Watson, 74% route participation. So looks like his dad was correct on his health. Then you had Romeo Dobbs out there, 86% leading the way. Jaden Reed was at 69% today. And that's after being at a 90% last week. But we know that was without Dobbs, without Christian Watson. So I think he'll probably still settle back into that 80% range. But to your point, he was a little bit dinged up today. So that hurt him. But it's just a spread out offense, man. It's very spread out across all these guys. You had a 19% target share for Jaden Reed. He led the team again. 13% to Romeo Dobbs. You got lucky. He came up with 2 touchdowns. He was basically Tucker Kraft this week. Like, he rubbed the magic genie. Christian Watson, 13% target share. Tucker Kraft, 13% target share. I mean, Josh Jacobs, 10%. Very, very spread out, which is what we've seen, from this Packers offense over the last under Jordan Love for the last 2 seasons. We haven't seen anyone emerge as like the clear alpha. If there is one, there's not an alpha right now, but Reed is the lead guy, and the rest of the guys are just kind of all sharing.
Josh Jacobs, 21 touches. Couldn't find the end zone, but still worked his way to 90 total yards. Still very much the 1A there. And I would even say just overall 1. But Emmanuel Wilson continuing to make the most out of his opportunities, 73 yards on just 8 touches. So I know we would love to see all of our fantasy running backs have these 95% snap rates and everything. But Josh Jacobs, still very much an RB1 as the focal point of this, pretty freaking great Packers scoring offense. And they're going to need to score a lot next week with CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans coming to town. Get your popcorn ready for that one. On the other side of the ball, Dwain, once again, a bit of an injury issue really impacting this offense. Marvin Harrison Jr. suffered a nasty looking concussion in the second quarter, got back up, and then quickly, fell back down. So with Marvin Harrison Jr. out, who did we see rise up in this passing game?
We didn't really see anyone rise up. It was just what we've seen already all year from Trey McBride. Like, he's been doing this. We just haven't gotten the fantasy points. But he had a 25% target share today to lead the team. He was out there with a 94% route participation. So he was right in line with what his season numbers have been, but he actually came through with 17.6 fantasy points today. Now, he did get a lot of those later in the game. The big thing I'm noticing, though, with the Cardinals, Ian, is like Kyler Murray just doesn't look good. Like, he's just not functioning very well within this offense. I spent a lot of time watching Marvin Harrison Jr. this weekend. I had a lot of guys I wanted to go back and just watch all of their plays that I could get my eyes on, and Harrison Jr. was one of them. And like, my biggest takeaway was Kyler Murray doesn't look good. I was really worried about Marvin Harrison Jr. And then I was like, because he wasn't getting open deep, and has been a challenge for Marv. He's not dusting guys deep at all. But we kind of talked about that wasn't really his profile coming out. But he's getting open on all these other routes, the comebacks, the deep outs, the crossers. He's still setting up defenders and doing all the thing he needs to do. Kyler's just been missing it. And then we're just seeing him come out and do these things in this game. I do wonder, Ian, like if Kyler kind of gets too much into that scramble drill mode sometimes, instead of just operating like within the structure of the play just a little bit more, man. There were so many plays on film where he's staring straight at Marvin Harrison, open 20 yards down the field, and doesn't pull the trigger, to only come back and still throw it to Marv like 2 seconds later, now that he's covered. So just some really weird stuff, from Kyler Murray right now. And that just worries me about this offense. Obviously, Michael Wilson is the next name up. He's been pretty good the last few weeks. Didn't have a very big target share today, 13%. But the last 3 games before this, Michael Wilson had been over a 20% target share. So if you are looking to throw a dart at someone, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is out and they're available, that would be the name, Michael Wilson, outside of Trey McBride.
I know we love to make the short jokes, Dwain, but
yeah. I do wonder, man. I'm with you.
There's a reason why teams prefer to draft 6'4" quarterbacks,
And the plays where I saw him missing Marv were dead ass in the middle of the field on crossers. Like, he doesn't even see him. It was wild. So yeah, I'm officially worried about Kyler Murray and his ability to support more than one player here.
Again, was Trey McBride being that one player as he has been most of the year, caught all 8 of his targets for 96 yards. He is a dog. But yeah, man, even if we do see Marvin Harrison Jr. miss a game, which really wouldn't be surprising given how, we've kind of seen players start going through the concussion protocol this year, we'll have an extra day. The Cardinals take on the Chargers Monday night doubleheader next week. We're doing that again, everybody. It's a situation where, again, we already talked about Marv this week, slipping down a little bit more into that mid-tier wide receiver 2 range. I mean, if we do have Marv out, Dwayne, I guess we would be prioritizing Michael Wilson, but even then, like, do you see him cracking your top 36?
No, he'll be a wide receiver 4. Again, like, he's done enough over the last few weeks to get into the wide receiver 4 conversation. Up until the last few weeks, I would have said he's a wide receiver 5, even if he's going to be out there 100%. Like, he didn't have a very good rookie season as far as like his target earning profile goes, but he showed enough over the last few games. I would say boom bust wide receiver 4. You could get lucky, and run into 80 yards and a touchdown with Michael Wilson, but it's not going to be somebody that can make it into the top 36.
Last point would be this Cardinals backfield. I believe James Conner was dealing with something. Yeah, they showed him running on the sideline. Never saw an official injury, but that is accordingly why we saw Trey Benson and Amari DiMercato have 9 carries to Conner's 7. So made the most out of those 7. I mean, some of the early numbers from PFF actually had Conner breaking, I think, 7 missed tackles forced. So doing his thing. But yeah, turns out, Dwayne, I think the big note here is that when Conner is out, not exactly going to be the Trey Benson, 3-down workhorse roll show.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway. I think he probably got hurt on the 6th drive based on like the research I was doing before the show, because he left for a couple drives. Then you saw him try to come back, but his Conner's usage was way down, and then he was eventually just disappeared. So I took it from there and went forward from the 6th drive forward. DiMercato played 74% of the snaps, had 33% of the rushing attempts. And the main reason he was on the field was a trailing game script. He had a 72% route participation. So by that point, the Cardinals, it happened early. The Cardinals were in full-on comeback mode pretty much from the get-go in this game. And so Trey Benson, that limited him. 20% of the snaps after James Conner was pretty much out of the game. 33% of the rushing attempts, which matched what we saw from DiMercato, and then 8% route participation. So to your point, Ian, in the kind of game script you're going to need for Trey Benson to feel great about, to get him in that running back 2 conversation, would be Cardinals heavily favored. It's real similar to what we talked about with Tank Bigsby. I think they're going to be in very similar roles. 2 guys that you're not going to get them past, mid-range running back 2. That's going to take a good matchup. Otherwise, you're looking at them probably more as like a high-end running back 3 if you think there's a chance that their team is trailing.
And honestly, just with what we've seen from DiMercato in the past game, I think it could be even a little worse, Dwayne. Like, what's so different about Benson and DiMercato compared to Cam Akers and Dario Gumbalala,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that can definitely happen. I would say the one thing, is the Cardinals did invest in Benson.
It's true.
And the season's already starting to look honest. It's not over, but it's not looking good. It's already starting to look like a lost cause. So I could see them also just saying, hey, all things considered, let's just get our eyes on Benson. Let's see what we have. James Conner's another year older. But to your point, there's definite risk. And we talk about this a lot. And I see a lot of other people go out and put out, and I'll see ranks and people on Twitter, and they'll be like, they'll have somebody like Bucky Irving in their top 10. I'm like, man, like, we're all hoping that. But until you see a couple of games where they give him that kind of usage, and look today, man, he didn't get 70% of the rushing attempts.
No.
Like, he had 50%. So you got to be careful with that kind of stuff. So good call out by you.
Get healthy, fellas. But yeah, man, you said it. Cardinals 2-4. Thank God they pulled that one out against the 49ers last week. Otherwise, we would really be having to have some tough conversations. And honestly, not that they probably aren't already. Before we move on, Dwayne, I probably did skip over the Packers wide receivers just a little bit too quickly. So Dontavian Wicks did say after the game he believes he's dealing with a shoulder sprain. Says he's good in day-to-day, but we know how those things go. Players tend to be a bit more optimistic about their longer-term plans than others. So Wicks, look, he was the odd man out before the injury. Didn't exactly come in and make a bunch happen. I know there's a lot of fantasy managers that are bummed out because they spent a lot of fab on him over the last couple of weeks. We are some of those bummed out fantasy managers, Dwayne. So just thoughts on, I guess, what to make of this Packers wide receiver room, because Jaden Reed, he's been a wide receiver 1. Again, I get it. He's being a little more efficient. You've mentioned him as a potential sell high candidate. I'm not disagreeing with you, but Jaden Reed, he's someone everyone's starting. But between Watson, Dobbs, and potentially a banged up Wicks, how do you want to approach them next week against the Texans? Because that is a secondary that, as we saw today, can be had by even a decent passing attack.
I don't think you can rank any of those guys as anything more than a wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5. Now, look, any one of them could come through because of what you talked about with Jordan Love. Jordan Love's playing amazing, throwing too many picks, but I mean, Jordan Love is pushing the ball down the field. We know we're going to get the touchdowns. We know there's a lot of opportunity for big yardage. So any one of them can come through. But right now, I mean, we're sitting on multiple years of Romeo Dobbs not being a high-end target earner. He basically has to back into these performances. Yes, we had the good, two game stretch in the playoffs, but really, if we put that in perspective, or really everything that he's done for his career, like, he just has those little spurts from time to time, but for the most part, like, he's just not a consistent performer. Christian Watson, as much as I love him, he can beat you from anywhere on the field. It could be a slant route to the house. It could be getting over the top of 2 deep safeties for a deep bomb touchdown. It could be a drag route across the back of the end zone where no Cowboy defender can keep up with him. I mean, there's a lot of ways that the man can score, but they don't play him all the time. And it's a situation where, again, like they're spreading the ball around so much. So I could see any one of them coming through. And this goes for Tucker Kraft too. I mean, Tucker Kraft, I warned about this. I'm not trying to like do a back pat. He's just going to he's going to fluctuate was my biggest point. Like you're going to have weeks where you're like, God, I hate Tucker Kraft. And you're going to have other weeks where you're going to be like, oh man, I'm glad I started Tucker Kraft. You're just going to have to kind of be down for that experience if you're going to play him. So I don't think you can feel confident about any of these players outside of Jayden Reed right now. And I will say Wicks, before he got hurt today, was leading the team in targets and air yards again. It was a short sample, but it's like the dude is a good player and he's hurt. So if he's back, I think him and Christian Watson are rotating, and then that just makes it that much more gross. I think the big question, like Ian, is if you're playing in a small league, I think you can move on from these guys. If you have something else that you can go get, you can move on. But just know that at any point, if it consolidates down to only a couple of them, you're going to wish that you had those players because it is a really good offense that we want to be invested in. I think the tricky part is if you invested in Dontavian Wicks in a 12-teamer where you're rostering 20 players and you know their waiver wire is just crap.
Yeah.
I'm not dropping him in those, man. I mean, if we've already invested 25% in him and we like the offense, I'm just basically waiting for him to get his opportunity again.
I think where we're at here, again, Reed, if we're doing rest of season rankings, Reed's a top 20 at the worst, probably wide receiver.
I think he's a mid-range wide receiver too. Like, because look, the utilization score even says it. It has concerns about his usage, but it also gives him credit for his production, which makes him that mid. Yes, he's a dog, man. And he gets the carries, which the utilization score doesn't take account for right now. So I think you could say, even if you want to call him a borderline wide receiver one, like I'm not arguing with that on Jayden Reed.
We're good with Reed, but do any of the other guys crack the top 36? I don't know if they're outside the top 50. Don't. I don't think they're outside the top 50, so they're not dead assets. We got a lot of bye weeks to deal with, and the flex, a good matchup, okay, but that's the problem. So Watson, Wicks, then probably Dobbs, but then again, it's close. I could see Dobbs being the most productive guy the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think it's a mess. I think it's a complete mess. The good news is you like the offense. You're just never going to know when to start one of them, Ian. You're not going to know.
Yes.
The week you start Dobbs, Watson's going off. The week you start Watson, Dobbs is going to be the guy. That's just how it's going to go.
So again, keep an eye on that shoulder injury for Wicks. Maybe he is out, and then all of a sudden things condense so we can give boost to, again, Watson and Dobbs with the more cemented workload. But yeah, one of these situations where, we got 4 mouths to feed at wide receiver, going to be, great for Packers fans, great for Jordan Love, just not so great for us hopeful fantasy managers. Let's move on to a bit of a less offensive game over here. The Colts took down the Titans 22-17. Indy obviously covering as 2.5-point dogs. The under cashed at 42. Joe Flacco was under center, Dwain, because apparently, the Colts, whoever the hell is deciding what information comes out of Indianapolis, I wish they would do a better job between Flacco and Richardson. Michael Pittman going on IR. Oh, wait, no, he's back and playing his usual role. I mean, just a lot of madness going on that I don't think needs to be all that hard. But regardless, really was a bit of a crash back to earth game for Flacco. Still got the win. Wasn't bad. But
against a really good defense, though.
Yes.
People have just got to give Tennessee's secondary some credit. Like, it's a good defense.
L'Jarius Sneed, they spent some money on the position during the offseason.
They upgraded.
Got the D-line fixed. And they are a good defense. So that is true. But again, we saw Flacco miss some potential long touchdowns, Dwayne, that I'm just saying if Anthony Richardson missed those throws, there'd be a lot more shade going around. Ashton Dulin from 44 yards out and Alec Pierce from 60 yards out, both could have had, long touchdowns to their names. So with Pierce, I mean, he actually ended up having 105 unrealized air yards. So yes, I know that goose egg not helping anyone in Fantasyland, but he was still getting those downfield opportunities. Would help Josh Downs, though, Dwayne, if he maybe got a few more of those. Another good game, 7 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. We'll take that 8 days a week in full PPR. But really, Dwayne, it's those air yards that are holding back Downs from ascending even higher, specifically when Flacco is under center.
Yeah, I mean, Downs and like Wan'Dale Robinson, that's like the Spider-Man meme right now. These two guys, here's Downs since he's been back from injury. Here are his target shares: 29%, 33%, 27%, 29%. That's freaking elite. I don't care what position you play. That's elite. Like, I don't care if like you're just running bubble screens every time and that's what your target rate is. Like, your team wants to get you the ball. Like, that's the point of the story, right? To your point, if we could get more air yards with that, again, today was another really low ADOT, only 11% air yard share. But if you're playing in a PPR, again, you said what the box score was, you're fine.
Yeah.
It's just a lot tougher if you're in a standard league. So games with Joe Flacco, we've talked about it multiple times, so I won't talk about it anymore. He's a wide receiver too. When Anthony Richardson comes back, that's the challenge, Ian, because more of those dropbacks turn into what? Scrambles. And more of those completions turn into what? Incompletions. And then that moves Josh Downs really down to more like almost wide receiver 4 territory when you get Anthony Richardson back under center, unless they decide to unleash this man downfield.
Michael Pittman, obviously the second banana here in this passing game, caught 3 of his 5 targets for 35 yards and one heck of a touchdown. Really nice contested catch in the end zone. The sort of play that, honestly, Pittman's had a couple good ones over the years. I remember he had the big, primetime game against the Ravens, couple nice catches there. But to me, Pittman's been a little bit more of that, target hog merchant. I just didn't think was capable of making, that many plays like that. So credit to him. Did we see him though, Dwain, back in that full-time role for what it's worth?
They limited him a little bit, but they've been honestly limiting him over the last couple of weeks. And he's been on the injury report before we got this news last week. So it almost feels like this is something he's battling on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah.
It does feel like, is it a situation where how's he feeling this week? Does he aggravate it in practice? That sort of thing. Feels like they're managing it. So 85% is below what we're used to for him. That still led the team. I mean, Josh Downs was at 80% and Michael Pittman was above that. He had a 15% target share. And look, honestly, the targets have still been pretty good. When we've had Joe Flacco, Michael Pittman is very similar to Josh Downs. Like, you can put him in the wide receiver 2 conversation in a good matchup when we know that he's healthy. The situation, though, is we're going to be getting Anthony Richardson back. So everything I just said about Josh Downs also goes for Michael Pittman. And he now has the target competition because Josh Downs has been looking so good. So, yeah, really challenging environment for a player of the archetype of Michael Pittman to survive and really give you a lot of fantasy points once Anthony Richardson's back under center. Really looking like what we just talked about with Downs, more like a wide receiver 4, maybe a low-end wide receiver 3, but you're not very psyched to get him in your fantasy lineup.
A.D. Mitchell still behind Alec Pierce, odd man out.
Yep, 28% route participation for Mitchell. Pierce was at 82%.
Hate to see it. So last thing we got to talk about with Indy is this still Jonathan Taylor-less backfield. Now, JT said earlier this week he's feeling way better. His words, not mine. The pain has gone down tremendously. That's the biggest thing. That said, Dwain still did not manage to even get a limited practice in. So I don't think it would be surprising if he's out again in week 7 when the Colts take on the Dolphins at home. No Tua in that game. That could be the sort of positive game script where we see the Colts put up a lot of points. And at this point, Dwain, do we have to start looking at Tyler Goodson as the RB to want in Fantasyland over Trey Sermon?
I don't think so. But Trey Sermon, like, we're going to talk about the other side of the ball here in a minute, and it's the most crazy box, utilization stat line you've ever seen for not scoring any fantasy points. The second closest one that I didn't mention on Twitter was this man, Trey Sermon.
Yeah.
He had 59% of the snaps, 64% of the rushing attempts. He had 18 carries. And he scored 2.9 fantasy points. We're talking Zamir White levels of incompetence right here from Trey Sermon. So they're still clearly leaning into him. I think, to your point, the door would definitely be open if they wanted to evaluate how he's playing. And you and I talked about it on last week's show. He didn't look good the week before. No. Like, he's not an efficient runner. There's parts going all over the part. I'm like, is that a towel or is that his leg? I mean, like, it's like a rolling ball of knives, but not in like a pretty way. And he's
not rolling fast either.
It's not rolling fast, and it's not gouging people and gaining yards after contact either. He averaged 1.6 yards per carry today, which was really terrible. And then he split the passing down work with Ty Goodson. So 36% route participation versus Ty Goodson at 39%. So Sermon, borderline, high-end running back 3, like, I guess. But I mean, I could see them moving away from him some, but it does right now, Ian, look like he's the guy that they're giving the carries to.
And if we saw them in a tougher matchup, I don't know, playing the Texans or a team that we would expect to be playing with a lead, then maybe we're getting more in on Goodson. But man, home against the Dolphins.
Stay away from both in that kind of matchup.
Yeah, that's a good point. So home against the Dolphins next week. Sermon, going to be tough to drop too far down those ranks.
Yeah.
But yeah,
hopefully we get JT.
Yeah, and closer start sit questions, probably just take the other guy. I think that's the moral of the story, Dwain. Jonathan Taylor, get better, please. Anthony Richardson, too. Would love to watch you.
Yeah, I mean, right now, just real quick, we're on 2 weeks. I know we're spending too long on Trey Sermon. We've got 2 games here. He's averaged 10.6 fantasy points per game, and he's averaging 14 rushing attempts. So, I mean, just kind of balance it out somewhere in the middle. Maybe he could get 12 against the Dolphins. I don't know.
He's Cam Akers, and we weren't very excited about playing Cam Akers either. So it is what it is. You mentioned, though, Dwain, the real hero of this game, the anti-hero, if you will, Calvin Ridley. 8 targets. He caught 0 of them, and he would have goose-egged if not for a 9-yard reverse after the game. Ridley's words, I need some in the beginning of the effing game too. Shit is getting crazy for me. So, Dwayne, talk about one of the wildest utilization games you have ever seen.
Number one, shut the F up. You led the team in targets and you led the team in air yards and you did jack shit with them. So why do they want to give you more early when you can't do anything with them in the middle of the game or late in the game? Come on, dude. Like, we've been seeing this from Calvin Ridley now for 2 years. He was doing the same crap to Trevor Lawrence. So, like, look, at this point, like, I get it. Look, Will Levis is a terrible experience. I understand. I would be frustrated if I was a wide receiver too. So Ridley, to your point, 0.9 fantasy points despite 8 targets, despite 133 freaking air yards. Like, I haven't been able to go back and search that way back. I guess I could have, but I don't remember a box score ever like that.
No.
Like, you'll get some games where it's like, oh man, 7 points, but it could have been 20. Not, oh, he scored 0.9, and the only reason he almost got 1 point was because of a reverse. So yeah, tough day for Calvin Ridley, and he had a really good matchup, man. He's playing against the Colts, so you thought maybe if there was a week that he could come through, this was it. He did not come through for you. One other thing I'll say real quick on their receiving core, and then we can go wherever you want. It was a new season high for DeAndre Hopkins at 70% route participation. Still not where we would want. In this offense, honestly, guys, you want 85, 90% before you're running somebody out there. But he had a 29% target share, came up with 9.4 PPR points today. So we'll just kind of keep an eye on D-Hop.
54 yards, and honestly, just eye test wise, I don't think he's taken a big step back. It's just been the Will Levis experience, man. Yeah. 95 yards on 27 attempts against the Colts. I know he had the shoulder injury, and that probably was the reason, because he hasn't been this bad all year. I mean, shout out Jetpack Galileo, great follow on Twitter. And he's kind of been on the whole, like, Will Levis and Trevor Lawrence aren't playing that different people, train, which I think is fair. And you look at some of the stuff, I saw Fantasy Points have a graph where you do see Will Levis have these high percentage of big time throws, tight window throws, whatever you want to look at. He looks impressive. It's just the boneheaded mistakes and the meme worthy moments, which, yeah, he also had 2 more today, guys. One actually kind of good, a Spider-Man like web celebration thing that was cool, but then also going on the sideline, took out the ball boy, who then had to be carted off in an air cast. So sorry for that ball boy, but yes, Will Levis continuing to, pop up, I guess, in the wrong moments, if you will. Good thing he's got that mayonnaise dealership going, though, Dwayne. I'm not so sure how long this starting quarterback thing is going to keep on working out. They're in Buffalo next week, so trusting anyone in this passing game is going to be a bit tough to wrap your head around. Maybe, though, Dwayne, we do get the Tony Pollard show, because Tyjae Spears did have to leave this one early with a hamstring injury, and Pollard, to his credit, has been making the most out of his opportunities so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, today, before the injury to Tyjae Spears, it was a little bit tighter. It looked like maybe coming out of the bye, they were going to try to tighten this thing up a little bit. It was 55% of the snaps to Pollard, 45% to Spears, and then they both had 40% of the rushing attempts, and then Spears got hurt. And once he went down, obviously, we know that Tony Pollard overtook it from there. But to your point, like, he's done a nice job with the opportunities that he's had, especially considering how bad this offense was today overall. 17.8 fantasy points. He ended up with 17 rushing attempts for 93 yards, 5.5 yards per rush. And then he had a 60% route participation. So we all know that Tony Pollard is a guy that's capable of doing work in the receiving game. And that is somewhere they have used him this year. And today he had a 17% target share. So yeah, I think if we get a game where we know Tyjae Spears isn't going to be available, then, I mean, it's going to be really hard to have Tony Pollard as anything worse than like a high-end running back too, which is really where we had him this week coming into this matchup. So I see us having him in a similar range in our ranks next week if Tyjae Spears is out.
Don't want to say I got lucky. It was a nice run, but, don't see too many draws on 3rd and 19 go for 23-yard touchdowns, Dwayne. So work for the Titans out there today. Good for Pollard. But, yeah, even next week without Spears, man, going to be tough to get too excited ahead of what will probably be, a double-digit spread or at least a touchdown there in Buffalo. Let's talk about some more AFC South goodness. The Texans took down the Patriots 41-21, covering a 6.5-point favorites and obviously covering the over all on their own at 38.5. Not 1, not 2, but 3 touchdowns for CJ Stroud through the air. Just 31, pass attempts, so only 192 yards, but more of the same from one of the best young quarterbacks in the game. Of course, though, Dwayne working without Nico Collins. So what did we see from this wide receiver group that was forced to adjust without the NFL's leader in receiving yards?
Well, we saw that they have two other good receivers and a pretty solid tight end. Tank Dell, 94% route participation. I excluded the last drive. It might have been the last two drives where we had Davis Mills in the game. So these are just plays with CJ Stroud. So again, led the team with 94% of the routes for Tank Dell. He had a 30% target share. That also led the team. He had a 28% air yard share on his way to 18.7 fantasy points per game. I think looking at Tank Dell, borderline wide receiver 1. I mean, he's mid-range wide receiver 2 at worst. Until we get Nico Collins back. So I think that's where all of our rankers will probably have him. Probably somewhere between like 18 and 15.
Like right next to Diggs?
And I'll be higher. Yeah. And I think either any time, like it could just be Tank Dell. So Stephon Diggs, he was good today too. 85% route participation, 23% target share, 37% of the air yards, and he came up with 19.7 fantasy points. So I think they're both like borderline wide receiver 1s until we get Nico Collins back, because we love CJ Stroud so much, and we know what a mismatch these guys can be with a quarterback like that. Dalton Schultz, though, man, he didn't come through in the fantasy box score, only 6.7 fantasy points, but 85% route participation today for the man you hate, Ian, with a 27% target share, 26% air yard share, but only 6.7 fantasy points. So just saying, with Nico out, there's a little bit more room here for a guy like Dalton Schultz. Now, I do want to say they had a leading game script, so that definitely kept like the multiple tight end stuff going. Ian, we didn't see a lot from Xavier Hutchinson today, but I think it's because they just didn't need to run their 3 wide receiver stuff. So Xavier Hutchinson, he had a 46% route participation, 7% target share. But if we were in a game where it was actually a shootout, I think you're going to see his numbers come up. He was the 3rd most utilized wide receiver from a route standpoint.
We'll say just based on the eye test. I mean, Diggs has looked good all season long, but was a nice performance from Tank Dell too. Yes. Honestly, hadn't had that sort of game film that we were being overly hyped about. So cool seeing him get that touchdown early. Seemed like Stroud was going out of his way to get, again, a guy who he certainly is a big fan of, more involved, and they did just that. And yeah, compliments to Stephon Diggs as well. Made life tough for Christian Gonzalez out there, Dwain, which we have not seen even some of the league's best wide receivers manage to do. Tyreek Hill was sending a lot of praise to Gonzalez after their battle last week. So again, really nice performance from Diggs. You know, one of those wide receivers a team like the Bills could probably use and be better off with. Last note here in Houston, we did get the return of Joe Mixon, 13 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Now, Mixon isn't one of these guys where and he also had 30 receiving yards and another touchdown. So great game. And I will say though, Dwayne, he's not one of these guys that's always been the, 0 to 100, small sliver of space and he's gone. But seeing him run on his 59-yard touchdown run, like it reminded me of like 35-year-old Adrian Peterson out there. Just a whole lot of galloping and not really going as fast as you might expect. So not so sure he's quite at 100% yet. Did we maybe see a little more of a limited workload accordingly?
Yeah, but I think some of that tied to the game script late in the game.
Makes sense.
You had 45% of the snaps, 48% of the rushing attempts. My guess is he gets more of those if the game is tighter. 13 carries, but it was Dameon Pierce coming in as the clear-cut number 2 back. So if you guys have him on the waiver wire, that does look like the new handcuff to Joe Mixon. Also had a nice run, Ian, and it was 76 yards. First play, he got the ball. He got like blown up in the backfield for like 3 yards. I'm like, oh God, here we go again with like all the Dameon Pierce stuff. He can't play in the zone. And I'm like, guy, like it doesn't matter what blocking scheme. When there's someone in your lap 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, like no one can play in that scheme.
Funny
but
how that works.
did get things going after that, man. And to your point, like Akers hasn't really impressed. Agumbawale, really more of a passing down guy. I know they gave him some of the rushing attempts last week, but he wasn't very efficient with it. So I do think that Dameon Pierce is the name to have here, especially if you're playing in these deeper leagues where there's nothing available. Dameon Pierce is quite often available. What that reminded me of on Joe Mix's long run when I saw it was J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Like a year or two ago, whenever he kind of had that little bit of a hitch in his giddy up. Definitely reminded me of that. But I think Mixon will probably be, back. Obviously, we're going to be getting him closer to 100%. In a closer game, though, I'm still guessing, Ian, he's getting like 65% of the rushing attempts. So the only way Pierce has value is if something happens to Mixon again. Knock on wood. Hope that doesn't happen. But he's an older player getting a pretty big, large workload. So we know that could happen.
As we saw with the Cam Akers experience when Mixon and Pierce were hurt. And honestly, just Pierce last season, the first 7 or 8 weeks until he got injured and then lost his job to Devin Singletary. Hey, in those games, I'm looking at the game log right now. I mean, we had, 15 plus touches and, for the first 5 games and still 12 and 13 carries the next ones for Dameon Pierce. That's not bad in an offense that we do expect to score plenty of points. That said, though, Dwayne, not going to be crossing out Mixon's name as, RB10 and putting in Dameon Pierce. If there's an injury, we would see a lot of Dario Gumbo Wale in passing down situations. But yes, certainly the handcuff we want to own right now. Over on the Patriots, we got to see the debut of the number 3 overall pick, Drake May. And yeah, there are some downs, 2 interceptions, also lost a fumble, but there are also some highs, Dwayne. Looked like a guy making his first professional start, but also looked like a guy who deserved to be a top 3 overall pick in the draft. I was pleased with what we saw, and I was just pleased to see the number 3 overall pick playing a football game for a team that actually looked like if they had him out there earlier, maybe would be doing a little bit better in the wins and loss column.
What's so funny is I already saw the tweets afterwards of, okay, we've seen enough. Now let's protect him again.
Yeah,
we know what we have.
What are we doing?
I just want to enjoy him. But I mean, I understand they don't want him to be ruined, but whatever. 19.5 fantasy points today, Ian. You will definitely take that. 243 yards passing. And again, it's not a very good supporting cast. 243 yards with the weapons he has around him. That's probably like 300 if you got AJ Brown and Devonta Smith.
Weapons start looking quite a bit better when the quarterback improves, Dwayne. Funny how that kind of works,
Well, DeMario did look good. The rest of the guys look pretty crappy. We'll get to them in a second. But 3 passing touchdowns to your point. You talked about the 2 picks, but a 61% completion rate with this group is really good. 7.4 yards per attempt. That's above the league average. And he had 5 scrambles. The 5 scrambles for 38 rushing yards. So this is the big thing that we talked about with May. We're like, we don't know for sure what's going to happen in the passing game. Ceiling is probably still going to be capped with this group of wide receivers, but obviously they're going to be better than they were with Jacoby Brissett. So when I look at him, Ian, and let's see what your thoughts are. I'm thinking right now, like mid-range QB2 with a chance, because I put him through the steps, right? But there's a very good chance, like after another game like this, we're gonna be like, okay, like he's a high-end QB2, and in the right matchups, we're gonna really like him. I mean, because again, the 5 scrambles for 38 yards is absolutely huge. That's in Kyler Murray territory. That's what Kyler does. Kyler's a 5 for 35 kind of guy per game. So if he's going to be throwing for the same yards as Kyler, which based on today, Kyler would love to throw for, 234 yards in some of these games. I think you make an argument that I'm being too stubborn on Drake May. But again, I want to see another game is my big point. But I would say that he could be getting close to the QB1 conversation if he has another game like this.
Obviously, the big recipient of it, as you mentioned, Pop Douglas, 92 yards and a touchdown. Also, a nice score down the sideline to another LSU Tiger. Just draft wide receivers from LSU. It doesn't have to be hard. Kayshon Boutte hauled it in before halftime. Hunter Henry did catch a third touchdown. So again, Dwayne, even if we're only getting 225 yards per game out of, Drake May, which let's face it, 2024, that might even be a bit optimistic. Would you put your, again, I guess dollars down on Pop Douglas and Hunter Henry being the top 2? Jalen Polk, certainly didn't show up today, but he was supposed to be the guy that was rising up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go heavy on them, but I mean, Demario Douglas is the most proven in my opinion, and also still has the mixture of being a young player. I think he's a good slot wide receiver. He had a 67% route participation today. That's a number we would like to see higher. We would like to see that at like 80%. This was a trailing game script. So I'm a little confused as to why he wouldn't be out there 85, 90% of the plays. He still came through. He had a 29% target share because he had a 32% targets per route run. So 8.2 ADOT, that's better than what we've seen. So definitely with Drake May pushing it down the field a little bit more, that could help him. Dude had a 37% air yard share today. That's freaking salty for a guy, Demario Douglas. 8.2 ADOT. That's more in the range of what we see from a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, not being attached completely to the line of scrimmage like we've seen with Wan'Dale Robinson and Josh Downs. So yes, if I were to have to pick someone, it would be Demario Douglas that I would be targeting. Hunter Henry would probably be my second choice. But as far as receivers, actually, I would change that. I would go with Jalen Polk as my second choice. He didn't do it to your point today, but at least he's a young rookie that we think might ascend and grow into the offense. Like if I were to think up a story where we look up in 3 weeks and we're like, oh my God, man, the Patriots are throwing the ball for 250 yards per game, what would be happening? Jalen Polk would probably be a key, right? He would probably have broken out. Or one of these other young wide receivers like Javon Baker we haven't even seen yet, suddenly getting some playing time, but he's not playing right now. So Kayshon, he had a 76% route participation, which was slightly higher than Polk today. So you could maybe give him something, but Kayshon, I don't know, man. Like he didn't do anything with his opportunities last year. Only had a 9% target share today. So I think DeMario's the safest one. My second choice would be Polk, then Henry.
Wish we'd see them, buy at the trade deadline. We heard them being rumored with some of the, Devontae Adams stuff before. Maybe we see him get back into that market. Amari Cooper. I think it was actually the Brandon Ayuk rumors is what I was.
Kendrick Bourne is the other name, but he's working his way back. This is his second game back, from the ACL, which he tore in week 8, I believe, of last week in. So these last 2 games, last week I want to say his route participation was around 35%. This week at 52%. So he would be the one other name. You're not picking him up off your waiver wire unless you're in like one of Ian's leagues, like where you have 32 teams. But yeah, I mean, a trade would be nice. A trade would be like probably the optimal way to go if you could get something done.
That's cute that you think Kendrick Bourne would be on our waiver wire, Dwayne. Come on. It's a lot.
Yeah, not in that league, huh? Not in my league, pal.
That should be the 3 wide receiver sets, though. Pop Douglas, Jalen Polk, and then Kendrick Bourne once he is back to full health. So only other note, Dwayne, would be that, yeah, there's no running game in New England when Ramondre Stevenson is not healthy enough to suit up. 13 carries for 19 yards for Antonio Gibson. Trey Sermon-esque, if you will. Did see him chip in 24 yards through the air, but what did the overall utilization look like for Antonio Gibson, Dwayne? Because Lord knows the production was disappointing.
I mean, he dominated the running back, touches. He had 50% snap share, 50% of the rushing attempts overall. But remember, Drake May's accounting for 19%. So if you just put it with him, 13 carries versus 5 for Terrell Jennings and 3 for JaMycal Hasty, like he was by far the lead back on the team, and he still had the thing that surprised me the most was like the route participation. I thought that would be like potentially 60%. Because he had been getting some of that. And then when the Ramondre gone, I thought, oh, we might stack those 2 things together. You get this passing down option. No, they did not want to do that. Only a 38% route participation. It was the JaMycal Hasty experience. They had to get him out there for a 31% route participation because you got to get your best players on the field, and you got to get JaMycal Hasty out there because you got to have the defensive coordinators losing sleep during the week, game planning for Mr. Hasty being on the field. So I would say Antonio Gibson, like honestly, like his utilization was fine. I think in most runouts, like he's probably scoring more fantasy points than he did today, but we can't get that excited about it because it is the Patriots offense. But at least there's the chance that it has a little bit more ceiling now with Drake May.
And they are traveling to London to face on the Jaguars next week. Certainly a team that does seem to be throwing in the towel just a bit on that defensive side of the ball. Maybe a chance to see against some spike performances from the involved parties. Dwayne, as we were talking, I did peep the Sunday Night Football box score. You want to guess the first touchdown? You can guess a million times if you want.
Joe Burrow rushing.
47 yards. 47 yards.
I saw it out of the corner of my eye.
Oh my gosh. My facial reaction when I saw it was crazy. I was like, huh? Is that a mistake? All right. Appreciate you guys again listening to us as we got that going on, though. Ravens took down the Commanders 30-23, and it was pretty much consensually viewed as I would say the game of the week. We'll leave Cowboys Lions out of it. It was a push with the Ravens as 7-point favorites. The over did cash just barely at 50.5. Just again, more of the same from this really Ravens offense, Dwayne. Another 300-yard effort from Lamar Jackson. I'm sure people will still slander him the first bad pass he throws, but that is now well over 600 yards in his last 2 games. Kings stay Kings for the 2-time MVP. And Derrick Henry, 132 rushing yards and 2 more scores on the ground. Now on pace to score 25.5 touchdowns this year. Great day to be great there. Zay Flowers, 9 catches for 132 yards, all in the first half. Would have been cooler if he got, a little more, but, beggars can't be choosers with that stat line. I guess the big note here, Dwayne, is Mark Andrews got a touchdown. We scored week 6, could have been earlier.
Yeah,
Would have been
he has 16% target share. Big whoop.
Did we see his routes get back to anything we can
60%.
Okay.
So it was split between him and Isaiah Likely. So we'll take it. Maybe a step in the right direction. Maybe not. Maybe just completely random. We have no clue what they're doing with their tight ends on this offense, guys. Like I wish I could tell you, but I would just be lying. But yeah, Mark Andrews came through with 15.6 fantasy points, probably because everybody cut him this week. Like he got cut in a ton of leagues. So Ian, I saw you were trying to cut him in one of our leagues. I don't think it worked out. I think we actually ended up missing on whoever you had the bid on, and we still had Mark Andrews on our team.
Did you disagree with what I was looking at?
With what?
Like he was probably the guy we had to cut.
I can't remember who it was that you were looking at. I can't even remember now. Yeah. But I think we missed on the other player, so we had to start Mark Andrews, and it probably worked out for us. But yeah, nothing to add here on the Ravens. It's the same as what we've seen. Zay Flowers, 36% target share today, but like you mentioned, all in the first half. So pretty consolidated offense right now around Mr. Flowers as the clear-cut alpha #1 wide receiver. I mean, he's not getting the huge ADOT like we would want, kind of similar to these Josh Downs and other types, only 5.2 ADOT today. But we've seen Zay Flowers have those games where they do uncork him deep, so you don't know for sure when they're going to come.
Flowers, one of these guys, man, where if we ever can get an offense that just wants to feed him the ball at all three levels of the field, I have no doubts he can
He
handle
can
it.
do
That
it.
guy is a
I
great
agree.
football player. So Lamar, Henry, Flowers, loving them. And even Rashad Bateman starting to stat together some good games, Dwayne. I don't think it's going to be consistent enough for us to overly trust in fantasy land. But hey, 71 yards, caught all 4 of his targets, and just really putting some good routes on tape. Fun to see him fully healthy and doing some good things on the football field. Over on the other sideline, we had Jaden Daniels, a quote unquote down performance, still throw for 269 and 2 tuds, chipped in 22 yards on the ground. As we've seen, though, Dwayne, really nobody can run the ball against this Ravens defense, and that did apply to this Washington Commanders offense. Austin Eckler just 21 yards on 9 carries. Jerry McNichols pretty much an afterthought as well. So did we see Eckler get that utilization, though, that we were thinking he might as a true RB1 with Brian Robinson sidelined?
Yeah, it wasn't near as much of the Jeremy McNichols experience this week. Now, he still was out there. He had a 39% snap share, but only got 11% of the rushing attempts. Jaden Daniels had 33%, and the other 50% went to Austin Eckler. So really playing more, almost getting the rushing workload that was left behind from Robinson Jr., not getting to add his and Robinson Jr. together, but essentially stepping into Brian Robinson Jr.'s role, but getting a little bit more passing work than we had seen from Robinson Jr. with a 62% route participation. So I do think there's going to be games if we do miss more time with Brian Robinson. Sounds like last week he was a borderline call and he played. He didn't play that much, but he scored the 2 touchdowns. This week he was ruled out on Saturday. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. But if we get another game where Austin Eckler is the lead back and it's in the right kind of matchup, I think he's a guy that we can feel pretty good about.
Mentioned those 2 touchdowns from Jaden Daniels. They both went to Terry McLaurin. Accordingly, I got my cool homage Scary Terry t-shirt on to honor the wide receiver 1 of the Washington Commanders. So only 53 yards, but Dwayne, someone who you wanted to, buy relatively low on, if you want to say buy high. Well, whatever. Hope you bought him. I mean, next week now we're looking at the Commanders taking on the Panthers. Is it time? Top 12 wide receiver, Terry McLaurin. Can we do it?
I mean, he's right there. I mean, he's the center point of their offense. 21% target share today. So, I mean, like he was slightly behind Noah Brown, guys. So Noah Brown 2 weeks ago, kind of stepped forward and was basically the wide receiver 2. Then he got hurt. And so he didn't play. And then he came. Well, actually, it was 3 weeks ago that he was the lead wide receiver. Got hurt, didn't play, came back last week, played limited snaps. This week was more back into that wide receiver 2 role. Still not a full-time role, Ian. 64% route participation, but he had a 24% target share. When he's been out there, this is the guy that they have really seemed to gravitate to. So not saying you go grab him in every league, but if you're in a gross league, Noah Brown is a name to remember. But yeah, Terry McLaurin, man, it's I think last week I moved him up to mid-range wide receiver 2, so probably moves to high-end wide receiver 2 for me this week. And then if he did it again, you could be living in the world where you finally get your Terry McLaurin wide receiver 1 season.
What a time to be alive, Dwayne. So leading receiver for Washington, though, was Zach Ertz. Kudos to you. Your sicko start coming through once again. Caught 4 of 5 targets for 68 yards. Almost scored a touchdown. Just got tackled at that pesky 1-yard line. So getting really close out there and continuing not to see any sign of Ben Sinnett, Dwayne. I mean, should we make milk cartons at this point? Because it does seem to be the Zach Ertz show.
Yeah, right now. I mean, we'll see what happens down the stretch. The thing is, the Commanders are playing so competitive. They're winning games. Obviously, they lost this one, but I think if it's working and they're winning, I don't think you're going to see Zach Ertz's role go away. I think where you have to start to think about Ben Sinnott is if suddenly this season goes sideways on the Commanders and you get into a situation where they want to see the young players. So right now, Ertz, as long as he's healthy, I think he's a borderline tight end 1 every single game, Ian. And man, dude, he gets wide open. Yeah. Because of all the scheme stuff they're doing and how much defenses are so freaking worried about Jaden Daniels and these play action and the different things that they're doing with him. It's like he just gets some of the most wide open looks every single week. He gets these wide open looks. So really nice scheme things working in the favor of Zach Ertz right now.
Very excited to play all these Commanders next week against the Panthers. Again, this one was going to always be a bit tough. I know the Ravens had good enough some passing yards, but still, I think a stretch to call them a bad defense. So honestly, the fact Daniels got through as well as he did, given some of the other defenses they've gotten to kind of feast on this year, in my opinion, still a very impressive performance from the number 2 overall pick. So guys, time to move on to the late afternoon slate. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about. And you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets instantly. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets instantly. And you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. Sports betting is not yet available in your state. Don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The Steelers took down the Raiders 32-13. Pittsburgh covering as 3.5-point faves. The over cashed at 36.5. So Russell Wilson was active, Dwain, but it continued to be the Justin Fields show. Not the most prolific passing performance. Not that we really expected one, but 145 yards, didn't throw a pick. And I believe, lo and behold, okay, he did fumble once. Let's not get too crazy, but he at least didn't lose it, Dwain, continuing to improve a little bit step by step. Ran in for not one, but 2 touchdowns, also chipped in 59 yards on the ground. I think that's what we were really expecting, more so from week 1, and we didn't get it, but we got it now, Dwain. And as we know, these sort of archetypes really don't make a habit of busting. Hey, situation where we haven't exactly gotten what we wanted out of Anthony Richardson and Indy, but if we have Richardson back next week against the Colts, we have Fields doing his thing at home against the Jets, probably 2 guys that are going to be ranked awfully close to each other.
Yeah, I mean, they're very similar. I mean, we're looking at the fantasy points, for Justin Fields. 12 points, 11 points, feels like some Anthony Richardson games. 18, okay, you're telling me there's a chance. 32, that's really great. Then it's back to 16. Then today, 23.7. You got 5 scrambles for 35 yards, 4 design rushing attempts for 26 yards. So coming through with the 51 yards on the ground is a big thing for Fields. And to your point, when you get a couple of those to go in for scores on the ground, you're going to have a really nice fantasy day, even though you only threw for 145 yards through the air today. So, yeah, Fields just has the archetype that we've seen it time and time again. Even if you're a bad passer, you're still most likely going to be a top 10 QB if you can run like he does.
He is not the only one running for Pittsburgh. Najee Harris, easily his best game of the season, 14 carries for 106 yards and a touchdown, finally knocking him off my weekly stat update of the most touches without a score in the league. Now we are all looking at you, Javonte Williams. So many of those yards came on the angry variety. I'm sure Kyle Brandt will have some shout outs for him tomorrow. And yeah, the especially 36-yard touchdown was sweet. And I certainly will be featuring him on that 14 or 15-yard run, which, unfortunately is equivalent to a whimsy, 4-yard catch in full PPR land. So great game from Najee. And it was honestly pretty surprising to see, Dwain, because we did get Jaylen Warren back. And at least for the first drive, dude, I think he had 4 touches out there. Didn't see that usage persist the rest of the way, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty similar to what we've seen in the other games with Jaylen. 18% of the team's rushing attempts, 34% of the offensive snaps. And then he had his route participation today was at 31%. So really just kind of in an ancillary role. He doesn't have anything that he owns in the offense. It's just kind of like, we'll get you involved whenever we can. And we don't know when that's going to be with Arthur Smith. So Jaylen Warren right now is just honestly in fantasy, he's only a handcuff. You can't have him out there until he finally shows us, and obviously you guys know that. You're not putting Jaylen Warren out there, but he's just a handcuff at this point. Najee, it did hurt Najee, like overall from his utilization. He had 48% snap share. He had 42% of the rushing attempts today. But Najee, the thing is, when you look at the percentages, he's always in around 13 to 16 rushing attempts, and he's still usually picking up 3 or 4 targets. So he's always really close to that 20 opportunity threshold. Just today, we finally saw it from Najee, where he actually did come through with some big plays. He was breaking some tackles, like you mentioned, and then he scores, the touchdown. So Najee did come through, but obviously I'm concerned about him still going forward, just because I'm not crazy about this offense overall, man. Like it's very conservative. They don't run a ton of plays. We've got too many mouths involved in the run game between Fields and Warren and Najee Harris. So it's just, I wish Harris was just a more explosive player. If Jaylen Warren was getting the touches Najee Harris is getting, I think we'd feel fine with it. We'd be like, okay, we can live with that. And we know we're going to get some running back 1 performances. We know we're going to have, some potential duds because of the offense. But with Najee, I love the volume. It's still usually there, but it usually fails. It just happens today that it didn't.
Again, look good today. We'll give them that credit. Home next week against Sauce Gardner and that Jets defense. Certainly a better secondary, but not exactly, jokes at the line of scrimmage as well. So I don't think Najee's going to be someone who needs to be ranked, inside our top 15 or anything like that ahead of that matchup. In the passing game, Pat Freiermuth had a 14-yard touchdown nullified because Justin Fields had gone just a little bit past the line of scrimmage. Was a nice contested catch, though, for what it's worth. George Pickens, they tried to really get him going, Dwain. Team high 8 targets, caught 3 of them for 53 yards, one of which was a 31-yard catch down inside the 5 that, let's face it, Fields puts a couple more yards of air under. Probably should have been a walk-in touchdown. Went right back to him with a fade with like 3 minutes left in the game for no reason at all. Just barely got knocked out. So they tried, Dwain, but just wasn't meant to be in this one. So George Pickens really looking like what at this point? Boomer bust, wide receiver 3, who's been a lot more of the latter than the former so far this year.
Yeah. And I mean, that's where we've had him, honestly. I mean, he's boom bust wide receiver 3. And we've had more busts than booms. 35% target share, to your point, really tried to get him involved today. What does that get you in a Pittsburgh offense? 8.3 PPR points. That's what that gets you. So dude had 54% of the team's air yards. George Pickens is a good player. Like, I think you and I, we've talked about it a ton. Like, we think he's a really good player. Does he do things that irritate his coaches and it irritates fans? And I get why some of you seeing him loafing and things like that. I'm not trying to argue about any of those things. I just know whenever he wants to turn it on, like, he's a really good player. But right now, just majorly handicapped by the quarterback situation and just the offense overall. Once again, 84% route participation. That's my only complaint with Arthur Smith, really, is why not just play your best players all the time? I don't get it. Why would you not want to have your best players on the field? But whatever, we don't need to debate this again.
Speaking of depressing offensive environments, let's talk about the Aiden O'Connell-led Raiders scrapping their way to 13 points. We got to see Dylan Lobb, Dwain. He had 1 touch. He promptly fumbled it and lost it, and we never saw him again. Alexander Madison did get a short touchdown, almost had a second to his name, but the 6-yard receiving score got nullified on an illegal man downfield. Would seemingly believe that we get Zamir White back next week, which again is going to kind of render everyone involved useless because got to keep getting Amir Abdullah the ball, and even he's going to be losing fumbles on the goal line as well. So we hate the run game. The passing game, at least for this week, did not have Devontae Adams, who we got a report from Schefter saying maybe the trade isn't quite as imminent. Maybe that's just, the Raiders trying to get someone to pay up a little bit more, but also Jacoby Myers out of the picture. So look, Devontae comes back. Of course, we're not going to be able to rank him that low. Devontae Adams remains very good at football. We've seen Jacoby Myers obviously do some good things as well, but for time being, it's Brock Bowers and no one else.
Yeah, I mean, if you get Myers back, and you're in the right matchup, you'll feel okay about him. I mean, we had we got to the 225-yard mark, from Aiden O'Connell today.
Against the Steelers, too. I'll give him a
yeah, against the Steelers. So, I mean, it's like you could do worse. I mean, and we've seen way worse this year. This year, we've seen way worse. So, that's actually not that bad. That's right around the average of what my projections are each week is somewhere between 220 to 223 yards. Across all the quarterbacks that I project. So, I mean, look, right at the league average is not terrible. And so to your point, it is Brock Bowers. He had a freaking 27% target share today, gave you 16.1 fantasy points in a PPR league, 83% route participation. We've got Michael Mayer now on IR, so he's gone for at least 4 weeks. And so that just really keeps things open for the route participation to be there. So yeah, I think Bowers, obviously we've already talked about it, locked into the top 3 tight ends for the rest of the way. I think you've got Kelsey right there. You've obviously got Trey McBride's up there. You got Brock Bowers sitting there. I mean, those 3 guys all look absolutely freaking fantastic. Evan Ingram had a good game today. But yeah, Bowers is definitely in your top 3 tight ends, Ian. If you get Jacoby Myers back and you don't have Devontae Adams, I think you have a borderline wide receiver 2 just based on what matchup you get. He's going to be a wide receiver 3 a lot of games. Some games we might have him more as a low-end wide receiver 2.
Could be next week, Dwain, at the Los Angeles Rams. Certainly a secondary that we have made a habit of attacking this year. So we'll just say with Brock Bowers, again, impressive enough line, 9 catches, 71 yards on 10 targets, but his best catch of the day sadly got nullified. Sweet one-hander over the middle, and then he flashed some yak ability after. So again, not that I didn't necessarily doubt Brock Bowers as, coming into the league, not going to be great or anything, but I wouldn't have been surprised if it took him a little bit to get adjusted. Really hasn't taken any time at all. That man is already a man among boys, even at the NFL level. Turns out, yeah, you put up the numbers he did as a freshman at Georgia, you are pretty freaking great at football. So, yeah, more on the Raiders again as we get into next week because that is a great matchup, just kind of tough right now with the existing injuries. My last point, though, Dwayne, would be Trey Tucker with a goose egg, someone that we have seen some good, production from this year. Was he not in the 3 wide receiver sets anymore? What happened?
No, he led the team with 95%
Okay.
route participation, but only a 5% target share. So just the last 2 games, he's really fallen off. Trey Tucker, low targets per route run last year in a rookie season. We gave him credit for not being on the field. We're like, okay, we're not going to count your target share against you, but just targets per route run weren't great. And then now we had the 2 games this year where it looked pretty good, but now we're really starting to look more like maybe Trey Tucker is just really what we saw last season. I don't want to ride him completely off, Ian. He does have deep speed. He has big playability. So maybe there's a chance he still gets going. The challenge is going to be, let's say Adams is even out of the offense. It really looks like it's going to be Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. And that really makes him the third guy looking in. Now, 225 yards can be okay for 2 guys. 225 yards per game for 3 dudes, that ain't working. You're going to need a passing offense throwing for 250 plus.
Bit of a crowd at that point for sure. All right, let's stick with another AFC West matchup. We had the Chargers take down the Broncos 23-16. LA did cover as 3-point faves. And we had, let's see, as I add it up in my head right now, the over cashed at 37 points. So with the Chargers, Dwayne, just one of these things where, watching Justin Herbert, he remains one of the best, real life quarterbacks in the league, but just only so much you can do when you're throwing to things named Simi Fehoko and Stone Smart with 2 T's and Darius Davis out there. We did see, though, someone that you were shouting out to anyone who would listen on Saturday evening, Kamani Vidal make his NFL debut. He might have played a little bit before, but this really was the first time we had him out there contributing, and he caught a beautiful 38-yard wheel route from Justin Herbert. So that was cool, Dwayne. It happened early, but didn't exactly seem to lead to much extra usage because this remained the J.K. Dobbins show even coming out of the bye.
Yeah, so the big thing here is J.K. Dobbins is going to move into running back 1 territory. Like, he's there. 18.2 fantasy points today, 73% snap share, 71% of the team's rushing attempts, 47% route participation. J.K. Dobbins, if you have him on your fantasy team, you should be absolutely elated. We're talking about an offense that wants to run the ball all the time. Looks like Justin Herbert was healthier today, so hopefully they can move the ball a little bit better than they did for those 2 weeks where Herbert was really banged up. Kamani Vidal does look like the handcuff, Ian. He did get a little bit involved on the passing downs, 26% route participation. He did have 2 targets today, but only 11% of the team's rushing attempts. Mostly all flowed through Dobbins. So we had Gus Edwards put on IR ahead of this week, and we did not see much of Hassan Haskins, only 6%. So it looks like they're really willing to ride J.K. Dobbins, who looked pretty good again. Only 3.8 yards per carry, but if you're just watching that game, I watched a lot of that game. Like, dude's just great vision. He's got good power, good acceleration, maybe not the long speed that he once had, but that's okay. You can live with that in fantasy. So yeah, J.K. Dobbins, man, is looking like an absolute freaking beast. And this offensive line's only going to get healthier and healthier. Remember, guys, you had the injury to Joe Alt. You had Rashawn Slater actually play this weekend, but he was still questionable all week due to that pec injury that he was dealing with the last 2 games before that. So I just think there's a lot of things to like about J.K. Dobbins, and he's already had his bye week, Ian. So love him.
A lot of injuries were also impacting, though, this Chargers offense throughout the game. Tight end Hayden Hurst got ruled out with a groin injury. And early on, it looked like they were going to lose both Quentin Johnston and Lab McConkey. QJ to an ankle, and then McConkey got checked for a concussion. However, both did return. And it was McConkey leading the way overall, Dwayne. 8 targets, caught 4 of them, 443 yards. And continuing to look really good after the catch, man. Not a big guy, obviously, but you do see where people were getting. I mean, they were like legit Antonio Brown comps for this guy coming out of college. So not saying he's going to be the freaking best wide receiver of his generation like AB was during the 2010s. Shout out Julio as well, certainly in that conversation. But if there was a chip to put down on someone in the passing game, Dwayne, got to be McConkey.
Yeah, 26% target share. And this dude's doing this every single week. 82% route participation. So, I mean, even though he's not in a full-time role, like, he's leading the team. And we did see this was a season high passing yard. Now it's kind of gross because it was 237. Like, 237 is fine, but you don't want to hear that after the word season high. Before this, Justin Herbert, 144 yards passing, 130 yards, 125 yards, and 179 yards. Again, a team that's very committed to the run game. If we could just get a little more like pass balance, maybe, Ian, I think we'd feel a lot better about Lad McConkey. The problem is we've seen these targets now for multiple weeks in a row. and it equals what we saw today, 8.3 PPR points. So I think you're essentially hoping, man, can he score a touchdown and I get 12 or 14 points out of it? Like, it's just hard to get a blow-up game in this situation, because the Chargers have also shown us, even whenever they're trailing, they're very willing to stick with the run game. Yeah. I mean, Harbaugh is very, very stubborn about it. So that makes it problematic. But I mean, I'm with you. I'm not doubting the talent. I think Ladd McConkey's a really good player. If he was somehow playing in the Chargers offense of last year, not saying that's the better offense if you're a Chargers fan, but just for fantasy, if he was playing in that version of the offense, Ladd McConkey would be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy right now. He would be a wide receiver 2, and he would be having wide receiver 1 weeks. But right now, he's just in a situation where, man, you can't find a team without a running quarterback that is running the ball more right now than the Chargers. Well, maybe the 49ers. Yeah. They're close. They're really close.
And you're right. We are focusing on fantasy. Shout out to the 3-2 Chargers, looking to improve to 4-2 with a winnable, Monday night matchup coming up next week against the 2-4 Arizona Cardinals. So on the other side of the field, another Broncos game, Dwayne, where just nothing was going right at all in the first half. Saw a little bit of goodness later in the game. Bo Nix ran for 61 yards, which has been a theme. That's been fun for my sad sack dynasty team that's been forced to start him throughout the year. And then also we did get a nice touchdown to Cortland Sutton. Sweet catch in the back of the end zone. And Troy Franklin, the former Oregon Ducks, which just freaking, I don't even want to get into that school right now. They scored a touchdown as well. So good for all that, Dwayne. But really, man, just continues to be an offense that we are having such a hard time trusting. Seemed like Javonte Williams was about to break through, but man, he lost another fumble, and really did seem like after that point, he was not getting a chance to touch the ball much after.
Yeah, I mean, he had a 23% target share today, but only scored 4.6 fantasy points. I mean, if you look at Javonte, the return of Audric Estime was not good for him because we were back to a multi-way backfield. You had Javonte was okay. So 68% snaps. It was the rushing attempts. 33% of the rushing attempts went to Javonte. You had 17% go to Jaleel McLaughlin, 11% go to Estime, and then another 33% go to Bo Nix. So that equals 6 rushing attempts. So that's not very ideal. Again, was out there for 63% of the routes, and he did have the target share, and Javonte has done that in the past, but to your point, only comes through with 4.6 fantasy points today. Did fumble. We'll see how that affects him. I'll be honest, early in the game, like when he had a few runs, like I kind of saw a little flash of the old Javonte.
That spin?
Jump cut. Yeah. I saw 2 jump cuts. I saw a spin move. I was kind of getting a little excited, even though it was the Broncos. And then, of course, I got brought back down to earth. But overall, to your point, like I don't have anything else to add on this offense, man. Like it's really hard to trust. And Sean Payton has a history of this. He rotates players like crazy, especially when he doesn't really have any good ones. And that's what's going on here. I will say quickly, it was Devon Villay that had 71%. Is that like Art Vandelay? Would that be like an Art Vandelay? But
importer exporter?
Yeah, importer exporter. I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. I had it down at one point, but he hasn't played in like 4 games, so I forgot how to pronounce it. Sorry to the Vili or Villay family. Someone can tell me in the chat which way to say it right. So he had he was back to really more of a full-time role. And then the other name that did perk up was Troy Franklin, 68% route participation, only had a 9% target share. So if you're trying to look for something that would be a silver lining that, oh, what if this happened and it unlocked this offense? Maybe it's the fact that Troy Franklin is getting into a larger role. Hasn't done anything yet, Ian, but maybe there's a chance.
Good to see them going back to him after that brutal drop touchdown there at the end of week 5. So at a minimum, Franklin, again, staying out there on the field. Unfortunately, they did not have Pat Surtain on the field. He suffered an early concussion and was ruled out. Not looking good ahead of that Thursday night matchup against the Saints next week. So again, with the Broncos, as was the case going in this week, good chance you are not going to be starting any of them if you can help it in Fantasyland. 2 more games to get through. Everybody, appreciate you sticking with us as always. We had the Falcons beat down the Panthers 38-20, covering with ease at 6-point faves, and the over did cash at 46. So Kirk Cousins, 225 yards, 1 passing touchdown through the air. Not quite as prolific as what we saw the other day. Still got Drake London, his 74 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Pitts, 2nd straight solid game, albeit Dwayne, 52 of those 70 yards came on a blown coverage where the Panthers just decided not to really guard him. So wouldn't exactly say we've seen Pitts turn an entirely new leaf. But that said, man, at least for one day, it was Drake London clearly as the one. And then also seeing Kyle Pitts match Darnell Mooney in targets. That's the pathway to Pitts. We just can't have him freaking 4th behind Ray McCloud.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is like we know London's fine. Like we've been talking about London all year, so we'll move on. 35% target share today, guys. Awesome. He's really good. But Darnell Mooney and Kyle Pitts were tied, to your point, at 17%. But still, that's not enough. Like Kyle Pitts being at 17%, like it's not the worst thing ever. Like you could probably live with it, but we still want more from a guy for where we took him in fantasy drafts. So it's really tough. I'm still not bullish on Pitts at this point. Mooney's still leading him for the season. If we look at a full 6-week sample, he's clearly ahead of Pitts as the number 2 in the offense. The big thing here, Ian, I know it was really good in the box score for Bijan Robinson. Came through with 25.5 fantasy points, but 53% of the rushing attempts went to Tyler Algier today. It's like, can we not just, I love that we got the 26 points from Bijan, but like, can we get a little bit of the garbage time work go to Bijan?
Yeah.
Like all of that have to go to Tyler Algier. I still think Bijan in most game scripts is going to lead the team in rushing attempts, but it's just not by as much as we thought. And it turns out that actually that reporter, I can't remember who the reporter was from Atlanta, that, said, it's probably going to be like a 55-45, guys. And we're all like, oh yeah, whatever. And then week 1 happened. We're like, whatever, dude. Like Bijan Robinson had like 85% of the carries. No, that dude was right. Like Tyler Algier's a real thing. He had 18 carries today, Ian.
10 of them did come on their last 2 drives. It really was.
I get it. But at the same time, like when you're struggling with Bijan, you want to get those games where it's like, oh man, he could really pile up the carries today, and he doesn't get to. Now look, he still came through for you on the 26, with 26 fantasy points. So I mean, you'll take it. But Tyler Algier, like it's not just the garbage time is my challenge. It's been over the last 3 weeks. It's just been like more and more and more and more and more. So it's really freaking annoying right now.
Look, I know we were hopeful that Bijan or Breeze could turn into, CMC lights out here, and they're not. Guess what? There's only one CMC. I think we're seeing that come to fruition in fantasy this year. Even the Saquons, the Henrys, the Kamiras of the world, they have their warts as well. So, hey, at least we got those 2 trips into the end zone by Bijan. Look good. Yeah, go ahead.
Prior to junk time, it was 59% of the carries to Bijan. Okay. So, and he's been right around 60. So that's been where we've seen him at. So yeah, good call out.
Look good. Thought he would look good against the Panthers, obviously. But yeah, good to get a season best and fantasy points there from Bijan. Certainly someone we're continuing to trust. I guess last point, Dwayne, would be, are we using this game as like a kind of a downturn for Darnell Mooney? Because, man, after last week, I know he was someone a lot of people use fab on, and seeing the, 38 scoreless yards, I'm sure some people are not too happy about that investment. So going next week against the Seahawks, still in that wide receiver 3 range?
No, man, you can't overreact to this 1 week stuff. That's people's biggest mistake out here, man. Just over freaking reacting to everything.
I'm letting you help him, man.
Yeah, I know. So Darnell Mooney, like 17% target share today. Like it happens. It's going to happen to Drake London at some point. Like, so it's just something you got to deal with. It's fine. It happens to all players for the most part. Very few players are immune to this sort of thing. So you should still feel good about Darnell Mooney. I think he's still going to be a wide receiver 3 at worst.
Then to our Carolina Panthers, Andy Dalton, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and just helping the Panthers offense not be, the single worst group in the entire league. And for that, we thank you. Chuba Hubbard, 92 yards on the ground, got over 100 with his work in the passing game. And yeah, I mean, coming into today, I think over the previous 3 weeks, it was only Derrick Henry who had more PPR points than Chuba. So pretty sure DeAndre Swift has beat him by this point, but still someone who's going to remain in starting lineups until Jonathan Brooks gets back, which, my God, man, the freaking reports that came out in March and April about Brooks being cleared by training camp, and then we're now entering week 7. The dude's practice window hasn't even been opened yet. Give me a freaking break there. So again, Chuba, loving him for the time being, and obviously loving Deontay Johnson. Caught 6 of 10 targets for 78 yards and a touchdown. We got Chuba, we got Deontay. They're starting in the heavy majority of leagues, Dwayne, and they will continue to be doing so next week when we get a nice matchup against the Commanders. The one other guy we've been hoping to see get freed a little bit is Xavier Leggett, one of the best touchdown celebrations of any rookie, doing the gallop because he's all into his horses and everything. Went out today and then again scored a touchdown, but just 4 targets. Are we seeing enough out of Leggett to get him into that wide receiver 4 flex worthy conversation?
I mean, I think that's where he's going to fall in the right matchups, but it was a 13% target share, 11% target share today, 78% route participation. So he's the second most involved guy in the passing game behind Deontay Johnson. So you're going to run into some games. I think you definitely want him rostered in deeper leagues because he's a rookie. Like he could continue to get better. But the question is, Ian, how much longer do we get Andy Dalton? I mean, are they eventually going to go back to Bryce Young? And you made the point last week, maybe could Bryce Young at least throw for 220 yards, or what was it that he did last? Could he at least do what he did last year, guys? Like, we would take that at this point. So it's just, I worry. I feel like that's just like the cloud that's like looming over this team, is the eventual return of Bryce Young. And maybe Bryce Young, it'll be problem solved. To your point, he got put in the corner, learned his lesson, and comes out and actually plays a lot better. But that starts to become my concern with every loss that we get for the Panthers, is how much longer do we get to see Andy Dalton?
Last point, just seeing his name pop up on the box score, but rookie Jatavian Sanders caught 5 of 7 targets for 49 yards. It's been a really banged up tight end room with Tommy Trembles and Ian Thomas both being on and off the injury report. So did we see a full-time role from the, Texas product?
Yeah, he had a 75% route participation. Tommy Tremble was out with a concussion. Ian Thomas did return off of IR this game, but he only had a 15% route participation. So it's hard to get overly excited, though, because it's Ian Thomas's first game back off of IR. We're probably going to get Tommy Tremble back next week. So we'll see. If somehow we didn't see those two players available, or we didn't see one of those players available, maybe Jatavian Sanders is like a dart throw at tight end. He had a 19% target share today.
Let's go ahead and wrap things up then with the Detroit Lions pulverizing, whatever adjective you want to use, the Dallas Cowboys 47-9 in Jerry World. And honestly, it didn't even feel that close. I mean, you can call it disrespectful, stop the other team, but my God, man, they really took that, loss last season personally with some of the trick plays they were trotting out there, up 4 touchdowns late into the second half of the game. So pick whatever Lion player you want, and it turns out they had a great game. 315 yards, 3 touchdowns for Goff. Montgomery, 80 yards and 2 scores on the ground. Jahmyr Gibbs, I guess, was the one guy they couldn't find a way to get into the end zone. He still ended up racking up 90-plus total yards. Sam Laporta had a 52-yard touchdown on a brilliantly designed flea flicker throwback. Jameson Williams touchdown, had another one nullified. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown found the end zone at the end because they just wanted to get him a touchdown, and they could do whatever they want. Khalif Raymond and Tim Patrick, Dwain, combined for freaking 140 yards, it seems like, as a receiver. So, yeah, this is what the Lions are capable of, especially against a banged-up Cowboys defense. But, yeah, man, look, it's the Detroit Lions. They're one of the best offenses in football, and we certainly saw that today.
Yeah, man, I don't have anything to add here. Like, you're playing all your Lions. You're playing all your Lions every single week. They are awesome. You're going to have a week where somebody gets squeezed out because there's so many mouths to feed here. But you're starting them. You're playing them.
What do you think about Penei Sewell and tight end premium? Can we get behind that, Dwain? All right.
Well, tight end is hurting, so okay, maybe.
Gosh. Of course, they did lose edge rusher Aiden Hutchinson for the season. That has been confirmed with the broken fibula. Hate to see that. Certainly one of the best players in the National Football League and the heart and soul of that defense. So I do wonder. Max Crosby doesn't seem the happiest in Las Vegas right now. They obviously lost Davenport, I believe, earlier. So need some edge help, to help that secondary that, let's face it, loves running man coverage, which is great as long as you have the pass rush to, not have that quarterback get too much time. So Hutchinson, hopefully, as good a recovery as he can have, we will see it in 2025. And then with the Cowboys, the worst regular season performance we've ever seen from them. Pretty close. I mean, man, just throw it out, Dwain. They got a week 7 bye, so they can think about it for another week. I know you and I will.
Yeah, think about firing everyone. Not much to say on this one. Zeke, in the first 3 quarters, I just excluded the fourth quarter because basically they benched everybody so they wouldn't die. Ezekiel Elliott had 50% of the team's rushing attempts versus Rico Dowdle at 30%. 35% snap share versus 28% for Rico. So a flippening of what we have seen in the past few weeks where we thought, oh, Rico finally stepping forward and taking this thing over. Now, Zeke turned that into 0.6 PPR points. So not saying that's something like this going to last, but Rico wasn't any good either, man. 5.8 points on his opportunities. So, man, this running back room is a real mess. Don't really want to have any of them near my lineups right now. I think it's just something we don't know for sure what's happening. And I will say Zeke's been battling a shoulder injury that they're not talking about. Like, there's been footage of him not even able to like lift his arm to put it through his shoulder pads. Like, his shoulder has been hurt so bad. That was the week before this. So we'll see what it looks like after the bye, but not ideal as far as the receiving game goes for the Cowboys. Ian, again, this is excluding the fourth quarter, which isn't perfect math here. CeeDee Lamb, he had 43% target share, 16.1 fantasy points. Jalen Tolbert, a guy that people got a little bit overexcited about, but I understood, like, it was the matchup where you thought maybe you come through with the yards, but only 11% target share. So Jake Ferguson, even, Ian, not doing much today. 11% target share for him on an 81% route participation. But I don't think there's really anything we can take away from this. The Cowboys are still the same Cowboys. You're playing CD Lamb and Jake Ferguson, and you're probably playing Dak Prescott. Outside of that, like we don't know for sure what's happening with this offense.
Dak was under pressure all day long. And when he did get a clean pocket, there was a decent chance he was going to make a bad decision with the football unless he got into CeeDee Lamb's hands. So 2 interceptions. I mean, the end zone one, especially, just brutal stuff out there. Ended up taking 4 sacks on the day. So they got the bye week. They can get right. They got a get right matchup. Oh, no, they got to go play at San Francisco in week 8. My God. Over under week 8.5 that Mike McCarthy loses his job, Dwain. I might take the under.
Man, I don't know. Jerry's stubborn about that crap. So if they got blown out, maybe.
When they get blown out.
When they get blown out, yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm not going to make Dwain.
They're going to get Parsons back for
Yeah,
that. You get the bye. You get Parsons back. Yeah, I mean, they're losing that game. So I don't know.
Maybe they keep it on like 28. I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. All right, guys. I'm not going to make Dwain relive that nightmare any longer. We'll get the Cowboys more ahead of week 8. So not great, but you know what is great? Another week ahead of NFL football. And that's always enough to put a smile on our faces, Dwain. And I know you have been grinding the utilization early on Mondays and really throughout the day. So everyone that is a Fantasy Life Plus subscriber can start getting that early on Monday mornings. I want to say by even 8 a.m. Eastern. And you've also been putting together the utilization report pretty much, by later Monday afternoon. Good job by you, Dwain.
Yeah, thanks, man. We'll see if I can keep it up. Some weeks it feels easier than others. It really kind of comes down to how many injuries we have that we're dealing with, and pretty long list today that I'm gonna have to be monitoring tomorrow to see if we can get any kind of news on what's happening. But yeah, the utilization report itself, guys, all of that data and the utilization score is in there, like Ian said, up at 8 a.m. Eastern every morning. And then, yes, trying to have the actual written utilization report out by the end of day on Mondays. And then, Ian, but what about that sheesh report?
We are sheeshing, pretty much at all hours of every day, but officially we'll be live, Tuesday morning, even Monday at like midnight sometimes, because I sometimes hit publish instead of save draft by accident after I edit it after Monday Night Football. So keep an eye out for that. But of course, you can just catch Dwain and myself here on Tuesday mornings, breaking down both reports and then getting into the upcoming week of goodness. And yeah, I'll even be back tomorrow in less than 12 short hours with Chris Allen and Paul Charchian, overreacting and underreacting and getting some guillotine goodness about the slate of action. So make sure you guys check all that out again right here on the Fantasy Life Show.